Hey my friends, so the Bluetti EB70S, S for Sport Edition or something like that. The EB70 has been around for almost a year now or so. There's a million reviews out there for the EB70. It looks like they sent one of these to every little 2-bit YouTuber out there. But the EB70S, there is not a single video about it. It just came out relatively recently for the holiday season here in the fall of 2021. And there's very little documentation about what the differences are, what's going on, what is the EB70S. I'm going to start right there to talk about that in case you stumbled on my video and you're looking for that answer. You already know all about the EB70. You just want to know what the updates are. We'll get to that first. Next, then, we'll go ahead and talk about why I'm getting one of these and why I'm upgrading from my old G.Z.500X, because while this has been great and I've had it for a good, I don't know, year or 2 years now for all our road trip camping and that kind of stuff, decided I needed something a little bigger. So the 4 key differences between the 70 and the 70S. Number 1 is the 800 watt AC inverter, whereas the original 70 had a 700 watt AC inverter. That's the biggest thing, and it's most easy to notice. In fact, the box, check this out. So this is the box it came in. It says model number EB70. No S here at all. But it does show 800 watt, 1400 watt surge for the AC inverter. So that's the one thing you can actually see on the box. In fact, if I look around here, yeah, on the top here, it just says EB70. EB70, steel gray, 100 to 120 volt AC, blah, blah, blah. There are the funny colors and stuff that you can get for it. I decided for the basic gray because it was, in fact, cheaper on Amazon by a reasonably substantial amount, almost 10%. And also, this lives essentially seat buckled in the back seat of our SUV. And so, you know, I don't really want it super obvious back there. I don't think anyone's really likely to break in and steal it for when we're with our vehicle in our normal adventures. But why make it obvious back there when it could be a little visible through the tinted windows? Second difference is that these buttons here that turn on the various modes, they have a much brighter, larger LED. That was a huge complaint from a lot of the reviewers, is that you couldn't even see if it was on or not. And so now we can actually see they are on. Also, the screen, one of the big complaints was that the screen would turn off after just a few seconds. It would just, poof, it would just go in no time. That's been resolved, so we can go ahead and actually see the input and output. There's no more data. It still is a relatively simplistic display showing battery capacity by 20% chunks and input and output wattage, but at least it stays on for a while, so it's not quite so irritating. It does not have a display button still, but essentially the way it works is that if the display is on, then you can press the button. If the display is off, you have to press any button to light the display up first, and then you can change things. For instance, this shows is on. If I press it again, it doesn't turn off, it just turns the display on. Now I can turn it off. Now I could turn the flashlight on. Now I could turn the DC portion off. That kind of fun thing. Okay, that covers difference 2 and 3. Number 4 is that, at least theoretically, the fans inside are quieter than the original EB70. Now, I don't have an original EB70 to compare it with, but I don't find the fans in the main unit, at least, particularly annoying. They are relatively muffled inside. It's not particularly high-pitched or grating on the ear. It's not any worse in particular than the G.Z.500X that I had previously, or that I have previously, that I'm going to list on eBay here as soon as I finish up this video. It definitely is a little more willing to spool up the fan and get going as soon as there's any power draw. It definitely goes ahead and kicks on, but it's not a high-pitched, annoying fan noise. It's not that bad at all. Now, what is annoying totally is this huge power brick. This big 200 watt power brick definitely has a fan that runs continuously, and if you want this to just be sitting on your shelf, plugged in at all times, in fact, use it. I totally use this. I put it on the bookshelf over there, and I use it as a USB-C power source for my laptop and recharging power bricks and cameras and that kind of stuff. I literally use it. I actually have this cool thing, which is a very moderately sized brick that has two 100 watt power delivery USB-C outputs and two PD USB-A outputs. And I actually use this when I go travel, not in the car where I use the big battery, but just like literally when flying or that kind of thing. I don't bring a laptop power brick. I don't bring a USB-C adapter to charge my phone. I don't bring all that stuff. I literally just bring this and a few cables, and this covers all the bases. This basically provides the same kind of benefit. It sits there on my bookshelf over there, and I use these great high-power USB-C ports to go ahead and power all my needs. But this thing, I could not survive being plugged in 24/7 because it is a whiny, annoying pain in the neck. So the solution I came up with is I got one of these off of Amazon for like 20 bucks. I'll put a link down in the description below. 120 watts output. Essentially, it's got a cigarette lighter. So I go ahead and take the included cable, right, from Bluetti, go ahead and plug it in, go ahead and plug it in. And this is totally silent. This is a kind of a standard laptop power brick. I just go ahead and leave this plugged in all the time, and therefore I have, you know, continuous power here in my office to provide these kind of DC power needs for my techie life. So let's talk about some differences now between the G.Z.500X and the EB70S. And it's kind of funny because if you look at reviews online, you'll see the 500X compared with the 500 watt version of the Bluetti. And you see the 700 watt compared with kind of nothing, and the 1000 watts are compared with the Jackery 1000 and that kind of stuff. This 700 is really kind of in an in-between space. That's too bad because the cost for these two is actually very similar. So cost-wise, they're in the same bucket, even though the specs are very different. So we can kind of think about, well, what do you want to spend your $600-ish on, right? Do you want to go ahead and go for Gold Zero, which has a nominal rating of 505 watt hours of capacity, a 300 watt AC inverter, a decent amount of USB-C, although it only goes up to 60 watts max speed. And actually a funny thing about the 60 watt USB-C port is its input or output. And I guess that's kind of cool in a way. You can actually charge this from USB-C. You can even charge it from both the AC and USB-C at the same time for double charge rate. But the funny problem I've had is I will take a power brick, right, that I've gone ahead and, you know, this one's fully charged. Yeah, it's fully charged. So if this was, say, 75% charged, and say the Gold Zero is done at 50% charged, and I want to top up my power brick because I'm going to go on a hike or something, and I want my power brick along to go ahead and power my GoPro for a time lapse or something. Because this is at a higher charge state, the two USB-C ports will talk to each other and go, oh, I guess what he wants to do is dump the power brick into the big power bank. No, and it's really annoying, and there's nothing I can do about it. This thing has to be almost discharged when I plug it in, and then they agree and decide, oh, we should feed power from the power bank into the power brick. So that is a little annoying, to say the least. On the other hand, the EB70S has very high power USB-C ports, two of them all the way up to 100 watts. And there were some great review videos. I'll go ahead and post a link in the top corner here. One of the reviews, the EB70 actually tested the full power output simultaneously, and they can put out 100 watts to both at the same time. It's freaking awesome. And they are only output ports, and so this whole funny problem with USB-C power bricks and not knowing which way the power goes, not a problem. In addition, we have two 5.5 millimeter DC outputs, and for those, you can go ahead and get these off of Amazon or whatever. Very standard plug size. These are technically good up to 10 amps, which is perfect. The Gold Zero has a similar thing over here, but it's not a standard port size. You have to buy the Gold Zero adapter, which costs you a little extra. What also costs a little extra on the Gold Zero is this. This is the car power adapter that allows the car to safely, continuously charge the Gold Zero. And that's one of the reasons why I went with Gold Zero initially, because they're the gold standard, and I really trust I can just plug it in. It'll always work. It can continuously charge and discharge at the same time. And it did that. It did that fantastic for a couple of years. But honestly, the Bluetti, it also does all that without all the extra costly little bits, and it does so much more. And again, we have an 800 watt inverter, more than twice as powerful as the Gold Zero. And the battery capacity is 716 watt hours, but also a different chemistry. The Gold Zero has a traditional lithium ion battery pack, and it's rated for 500 recharges to 80% capacity, although it says in the manual, you can totally plug this in, leave it 100% charged continuously so it is always ready in case of emergency. Well, that's great. On the other hand, the Bluetti uses the maybe more modern, although also less space and weight efficient lithium iron phosphate battery pack. Lithium iron phosphate is completely happy charging to 100%, no problem at all. So slightly different dynamic here. And because of that, the Bluetti is rated for 2,500 recharges to 80%, which I guess is some metric they all agreed to use. I don't know why they use that. But I've always kind of wondered, then what is the usable capacity, right? You know, the Bluetti, can we go ahead and really truly use the whole capacity? Whereas the Goal Zero, if the manual says that you can plug it in and leave it continuously charging so it's always ready for you in an emergency, does that mean they're not letting you actually charge to 100%? Is your actual usable capacity less? Let's do some actual capacity testing. Check this out. So initially by the specs, the capacity is 716 versus 505. The delta, therefore, is 211 watt hours. So therefore, the EB70S is about 42% higher capacity. That's great. But again, as I mentioned, it actually is heavier and somewhat larger. And so your weight is 21.4 pounds versus 12.9 pounds, again, by the specs. And so your watt hours per pound is actually better in the G.Z.500X. But when you actually test, and what we used is our nifty little top wit 300 watt at the low power setting, 600 watt at the high power setting, little pot, which we use this for mulled wine, for soup. Honestly, the colder the weather it is, the more likely we're going to use this during an evening, which is kind of bad because the more likely we are to use this, the more likely to use our electric heating blanket inside our tent, which will also suck a lot of power overnight, which is why we kind of wanted more capacity. The 500 watts was really just kind of so-so. A Jackery 1000 was just too big and didn't really have the nice high power USB port. So we wanted something in between. Testing it, we used this set to 300 watts. So it's exactly the same power draw from both of these devices. So here we go, measured and delivered stats. We did 2 test runs. The EB70S actually delivered, according to the little WhatsApp device, it actually adds up all of your watt hours. So it delivered 583 before it failed. Second time, 584, an average of 583.5 on the Bluetti EB70S. G.Z.500X, though, not nearly as good. 336 and 325. I did do a second test to make sure it was so bad. I was like, wow. And the second time around, it did even worse by 10 watt hours. That's an average of only 330, a difference of 73.51%. Huge, huge difference. And if you're like, you know, measuring out every watt of capacity for the weight that you're carrying, actually, the Bluetti is significantly better than the Goal Zero. So there's 2 things I could say here about the apparent lack of capacity from the 500X. First thing I could say, as I mentioned earlier, is because of the more traditional lithium-ion battery pack, they don't allow you to actually use the whole 505 watt-hour theoretical capacity of the batteries to protect it, right? So you're only allowed to go up to like 80% or 90% or something. And so calling this a 500 watt hour battery pack is a little disingenuous. The second possibility is that because the inverter is only 300 watts and we were driving it at 300 watts, we were so close to limits of the electronics, we pushed it into a realm of inefficiency that the Bluetti, having an 800 watt inverter, just didn't even come close to. And so maybe we were causing extra trouble because we were pulling power from it so quickly. That's a possibility, and maybe it's not that fair, and therefore maybe at a slower trickle discharge of DC power feeding to your cooler, that it would provide much more power percentage-wise compared to Bluetti. But we totally do use these electric cookers that draw 300 watts of power, and so, you know, to some extent, it's kind of a fair comparison. And again, when we were testing out our electric blanket just recently up in Mendocino on the coast in a cold, wet, chilly campground, you know, we would use the electric pot to warm up mulled wine and some soup for dinner. So we'd be down to like 60-something%. Then we would turn on our electro warmth mattress heater. We didn't use it a lot, but if it's really cold, if we're really gonna run it all night long, this thing, even theoretically, is only gonna provide about 8 hours of power and quite possibly a lot less. Hence, why we've been looking at a larger capacity unit like the EB70S. So having an 800 watt AC inverter around is actually pretty sweet. Like, there's other things we could power with this. You know, we live in California, and so weather-induced power outages actually happen now and then, whether that be super high heat and fires or super cold, and actually today it's pouring rain outside. If the power goes out, well, can this power our full-size refrigerator? And if so, for how long can it? We got initial surge up to 450-ish watts. We'll put this into watt-hour mode. You can hear the fan going. For those of you who are curious, by the way, the Bluetti actually sucks in from the left and outputs air from the right. The Goal Zero is the opposite, if for some reason you care about that and how you're installing it in your overlanding vehicle or whatever. Anyway, let's go ahead and let this run for a while, and we'll try to figure out like an average power usage over time, and then we can try to figure out the math about how long this will actually power our relatively standard LG fridge. All right, we've been running for just about an hour. Honestly, besides that initial spike to 450 watts as we initially plugged it in, it's really been barely using any power. We've only used about 45 watt hours in an hour. And so realistically, on this battery with the Bluetti, if it's fully charged up with our fridge, if we were to lose power because of some PG&E drama, it looks like we could run something like 10 to 12 hours or so off of this and keep our fridge nice and cool. Pretty cool to see. Let's go try something else. So we've been working recently on putting together like a camp shower kit, right? And I know what you're thinking. What's the point of a camp shower if you can't have a camp blow dry? So let's go ahead and give this a shot. I'm going to start out on, we do high fan. Easy. So high fan, low heat is no problem. A little over 200 watts. Let's try medium heat, high fan. Yeah, it's 850 watts. That's definitely right on the spec. Now you can hear the fan going. Again, I don't really think that's terribly loud, honestly, the grand scheme of things, since it only runs when you've got a bunch of power draw. It just turned off. But let's go ahead and see how long we can get it to run. 850 is a little over spec. It's an 800 watt AC inverter. And so it may time out and trip up, or it may just keep running. Let's see. Still going. Oh, I did finally trip out. Overload because it was over 800 watts. It actually worked for a little reasonable amount of time, but you could certainly do high fan with low heat, or you could do low fan with medium heat. Let's try that real quick. Let's go ahead and re-trip it. It's off. There we go. That's low fan, medium heat, no problem. Low fan, high heat. Ooh, that does get warm. It's like a heat gun. Totally works. Yeah, like travel size blow dryer, but Monica might appreciate this. So there we go, the Bluetti EB70S. Now that you know what's the difference between the normal EB70 and the 70S, well, now you can make an educated decision, right? You know, there are discounts right now on the EB70. If you can find one on the cheap, it is the same battery between the 70 and the 70S. There's just the kind of usability functions. Again, the larger AC inverter, the nicer buttons with the better LEDs, the longer screen on time, the quieter fans, theoretically. You know, so there's some usability reasons to get the 70S if you really want the best. But if you could get the EB70 for cheap, well, that's also a nice thing because it's exactly the same battery and it's a fantastic capacity as we tested out against the G.Z.500X. The capacity of this thing is fantastic. And again, it's got all the extra features of the USB-C ports. I'm actually powering the GoPro right now. I'm currently recharging from the power adapter I showed you. So it's over there and it's actually powering it nice and silently and slowly recharging it. And one thing I forgot to mention actually completely is there actually is a wireless charging thing. Here, I'll put my cell phone up here. There's a wireless charging thing on top. I can't imagine ever freaking using it. You know, when we're camping, right? You know, I want to recharge my phone fast so it's back in my pocket for taking opportunity pictures and videos and that kind of stuff. I'm not going to want to park it on top of this thing and let it sit there to slowly wirelessly charge. No, I'm going to plug into the USB-C port and I'm going to charge up as fast as possible. So I don't know. It's here if that's interesting to you, but you know, I can't imagine ever actually using it. But there we go, the EB70S. Definitely happy to get this upgrade to enable more interesting things. It's kind of interesting, you know, electric camping. You know, we started out with a G.Z.500X and just to power our cooler, and it would power it overnight, you know, maybe almost 24 hours and stuff. And that was good enough. But, you know, then it was like, well, you know, we could upgrade a little bit to the 500X and have way more power compared to the price and the weight and stuff. And so we did that. But then we could, you know, we could do the electric kettle kind of things. And then we start looking into electric blankets. And then we want more capacity. And now we're up to a 700 watt hour. It's kind of funny, you know, you know, we keep on pushing the limits. And maybe we have this for a while and it'll be like, well, this is great. We can power our laptops, we can do other things, but now we need a higher capacity unit or maybe solar or something. I don't know. We'll see what comes down the road. But at this stage in our electric camping evolution, this is an awesome upgrade. Thanks for watching, everybody. Take care.